Praise the Lord, the GBNews pub is open, unlike most of the other pubs will be by the end of the year. And joining me is rapper, podcaster and women's deadlift record holder, Zuby. But before I speak about him, about what he does best, I'd like to show you what he does for a living.
Oh, you don't like my style?
Okay, dude.
Oh, you don't like my lyrics?
Okay, dude.
Oh, you don't like my politics?
Okay, dude.
Do you even know what knowledge is?
Okay, dude.
Oh, now they want to mention me.
Okay.
Cheers, dude.
Cheers, man. Good to see you.
How are you doing?
Blessed and highly favored as always.
So listen, I came across you after the deadlift, which was I think everyone came across you after the deadlift. But you then, I watched how you sort of built a life from what you were doing. I mean, you've been doing it all and you're always motivating other people to do it. I sense inside of you, you've been very outspoken on vaccinations, you've been very outspoken on bodily autonomy, you've been very outspoken on, not outspoken, logical and sensible about all of this stuff. Where do your principles and your views and your standpoints come from?
Man, that's always a difficult one to answer, I think, for anybody. I guess it's a combination of my personality, my upbringing, my experiences, the way my brain works and the way that I view the world. I have a really diverse background. I was born in the UK, grew up in Saudi Arabia, went to an international school there, essentially an American school for several years. Came back to the UK, went to school here for a while, went to university here. My family background's originally from Nigeria. And on top of that, I've traveled to about 38 different countries now. I spent a lot of time in the US. I've got a big audience over there. I'll be heading out to Australia soon, in fact, as well. So I just try to make sense of the world. And I'm someone who's naturally intellectually curious. So I think that my beliefs and perspectives stem from a combination of that.
Yeah, and you encourage people to get jacksinated rather than vaccinated necessarily. I really like it. So you say you went to school in Saudi Arabia. What was that like?
Yeah, sure. So I was in Saudi Arabia, where I lived was kind of like an expat bubble. So there's sort of two sides of it. If you live in a Gulf country as an expat, they have small towns. They're called camps where primarily expats live, so you've got those small little bubbles, and then outside
safe
spaces, yeah, and then outside of that, they've got the real cities. So you get to see both sides. But I lived there from the age of 1, pretty much. So that's where all my earliest memories are. I was there in school from the age of 5 up until 11. So I was in the American school system, kindergarten to 5th grade, and then essentially after 5th grade, I went to boarding school here in the UK, and I studied here for another 7 years, and then I did well in school, got into Oxford University, studied computer science there, graduated. It's also where my music career started. I released my first album when I was still studying at Oxford, and I went full-time with my music in 2011. And for the past 11 years, I have been carving a name for myself initially just through music, but then that expanded into realms of social media and social cultural commentary. Started my podcast in 2019, wrote and released my first book, Strong Advice, Zuby's Guide to Fitness for Everybody then. Had my first appearance on Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson, Ben Shapiro, lots of big US podcasts and shows. And over the past 3.5 years, my audience and reach has just exploded all over the world.
What I really admire about you is you seem to do it single-handedly, and you will not stop at anybody else. You're not relying on anybody else to deliver. Like, I've got a thing on there that tells me what to say. But and I watch your, I don't know if you still do it because you're probably too big now, but you would do these little auctions online. You'd be going like, I've got 50 books to sell, buy that, and there's now, and they get more expensive, the less you do it. And you've essentially made a real... You're a true entrepreneur in the oldest sense of the word, and it's such an admirable thing. And where do you think that work ethic comes from? Is it a family thing? Is it a mum-dad thing? Or, what are your views on the family, for example?
Man, what are my views on the family? Man, family is
we need them?
Bedrock. Family is the bedrock and cornerstone of a society. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm a big champion for individual rights and self-determination and independent thinking, independent action, critical thought. But no man is an island. We all come from a family and a long lineage whether we like and appreciate that or not. But family is the cornerstone and bedrock of a country, of a community, a town, a city, a nation. Yes, it's made up of individuals, but that family dynamic and unit is extraordinarily important. And when it is not intact or when there are problems there, it leads to wider problems in a society and wider problems in a nation. So I'm very pro-family, which sounds like a weird sort of thing to say. I think that everyone should be pro-family. It sounds like a sort of default position. But I think that in this strange and turbulent time where everything is controversial and everything is up for debate, even very, very basic things, I think perhaps it's important to reiterate the fact that family is incredibly important. And I'm very, very blessed to come from a great family and have wonderful parents and wonderful siblings. And that's truly a blessing. I think that's the biggest privilege one can really have.
That's such a good, I believe the same. Do you think that, what do you make of the Italian elections? Are you political at all? Do you care about politics?
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of people view me through a very political lens.
Do they? What political?
A lot of people do. I'm not really into party politics per se. I'm more interested in big ideas. I'm very interested in humanity as a whole and what makes us think and behave the way that we do. It's part of why I love traveling to different cities and different countries, experiencing different cultures, talking to such a range of people, whether interviews like this or through my own podcast and other people's, because that's how we really get to learn about the world. People have all sorts of different beliefs and perspectives. We've got about 8 billion people in this world, and there's no two of them who believe the exact same thing on every issue. And I think that that is interesting. We've got such a range of personalities, experiences, talents, ways of thinking, perspectives, and I honestly think that we can all learn from each other. I think one of the biggest concerns I have with the way some things seem to be going in the West is that conversation and thinking themselves are often being discouraged. There's just a set narrative and a very narrow range of views that are considered acceptable. And anyone who goes outside of that or who questions it or challenges it or even sometimes wants to have a conversation, right? There'll be someone right now on the internet who's mad that we are sitting here talking to each other. And to me, that's insane. I think we need more conversations, not less.
Why do you think we've stopped talking to each other? Or, I don't think about it in terms of talking. I think about it in terms of listening. My mother, God rest her soul, always used to say to me, draw people out, find out what they think. And then from that minute that you start to engage with them lovingly, even people that don't necessarily love you back, you start to find out a bit about them. So rather than when did we stop talking to each other, when did we stop listening to each other? And why? And what's going to happen?
Man, I think there's a lot of factors to it. I think the internet and social media is a factor. I don't think it's all of it. I think that attention spans have shrunk down. And one thing about the internet and social media is people see one another as caricatures. When you're on Twitter or Instagram or these other platforms, it's easy to forget that there are other human beings on the other side, assuming it's not a bot that you're talking to. And when people are reduced to a tiny little avatar and a bio and a couple opinions that you can see, it actually causes conversations to happen backwards. And then with people flicking through all the time, there's just very short attention spans. And I think some of it comes down to what I'd call intellectual laziness. I think that it's difficult to view people as individuals. It's easier to just have boxes that you can put people in, and people like to have boxes and labels that they can just put on people, because once you put a label on someone, you don't need to view them as an individual anymore. You don't need to know them. You can just hear one thing they say or see one aspect about them, visible or not, and you already have your prejudgments about that box. So once you put someone in that box, whether it's, okay, I think this about liberals, I think this about conservatives, I think this about religious people, I think this about atheists, I think this about people who vote this way, people who vote that way, I think this about white people, I think this about black people. And you see oftentimes people performing this intellectual laziness, right? So rather than really
it's easier to be virtuous and to actually do something about anything.
It is. I think it's just, quicker and easier for people. I think people don't like to use their brains and use that intellectual energy more than is necessary, which is understandable to a degree because we live in a really complex world. We live in an extraordinarily complex world. Our eyes can only focus in one place at one time. We can only hear one conversation properly at one time and so on. So if you're moving around and you're seeing thousands and thousands of people all the time and you're just trying to focus on what's important, we have certain pattern recognition and heuristics, and you can navigate the world just by thinking, okay, I think this about this. It's a simplification way. But I think that when you apply that to individual human beings, then that's a problem. And I think that's where true types of bigotry actually, if you think about it, that's really where they stem from, right? That's where racism stems from, sexism. This is when you just take a huge category of people and you just say, okay, I think this about this group, and I don't need to do any more work. It's very lazy.
It's the laziest way of thinking, and we need to encourage better thinking. My friend,
man,
so great to meet you finally.
Likewise.